Two movies back to back for 2 weeks in a row. We're back. What is up, everybody? Random Random Man here, bringing you my reviews, as I stated it in the intro of this video, for not one, but two movies in one take. Both of these films are the new wide releases of the weekend, and coincidentally, even though they are not in the same genres, they are the 2026 versions of their respective franchises. If you want to skip to the second review of the video, here it is up here on the screen. But if you want to watch both of them, I'm going to be starting out with the 2026 version of Scary Movie, or Scary Movie 6. Now, the plot of this parody film follows Cindy Campbell and her friends, Ray Wilkins, and siblings Shorty and Brenda Meeks, as they reunite when the same killer from the first film resurfaces. Going into this movie, I didn't know exactly what to expect from it, because my history with the Scary Movie franchise, or just parody or spoof films in general, has not necessarily been the best. Of course, there are classic spoof films out there, like ones from Mel Brooks and those starring Leslie Nielsen. But in the 21st century, as it began, we got Scary Movie from 2000, which I went back to that film and the second film that came out a year later in 2001, prior to seeing now the sixth film, as this film is apparently acting as a spiritual successor to both of those films. And the first Scary Movie film I do like. I think that it is a film that, for, I guess, modern audiences back then, got their basic taste of spoofs and other stuff like that. Also, with the Wayans siblings being involved behind the scenes and that kind of humor really striking a chord with them. I thought it was effective in what it was trying to do in terms of basically parodying a lot of horror films from that era. And then Scary Movie 2, with its whole haunted house angle, changing things up a bit. I thought it had its moments, though I thought was an inferior sequel. Ugh, that car passed by, or whatever that was. Anyway, this is what I get for doing this in one take. Then after that, apparently the Wayans siblings did not get along or see eye to eye with the producers of the series, and they left creatively. Keenan Ivory Wayans directed the first two films and was one of the writers of these first two films, along with his brothers, Sean and Marlon Wayans, who also starred in front of the camera. And I didn't see the other three Scary Movies, and there were a bunch of other movies from two of the same writers of the previous films, and they started a string of parody movies that are among the worst movies of the comedic genre just within that era. Stuff like Epic Movie, Meet the Spartans, Disaster Movie. I know I'm missing a ton, but yeah, talk about appealing to the lowest common denominator and all that other stuff. It was also around the time that YouTube was emerging and better parody and spoof stuff was coming out of that platform here than movies theatrically. Then spoof films have been making a bit of a comeback lately. We got The Naked Gun from last year, starring Liam Neeson, which I didn't see, but I heard good things about. And now we have Scary Movie 6. And allegedly, this film was seeking out to cancel the cancel culture that has really emerged since the Wayans siblings have been involved with these movies behind the scenes. I know that Marlon Wayans did the haunted house movies, but I never saw those either because I heard those weren't very good. But in any sense, now we have Scary Movie 6, and I was curious to see what this movie would do in terms of trying to now bring a modern update to the formula that had worked well and given itself a cult status with the first few films at least. Starting out with the cast and their performances, we have Anna Faris as Cindy Campbell. Now, I believe the first film was her first movie role ever, and that's quite a breakout role because she starred in a string of comedy movies after and made her a star. And for playing the dumb blonde archetype so well in those first few Scary Movies, I think she came back to this role really well. I think she's honestly really sweet, and as airheaded as her character is, it works. And now being a paranoid schizophrenic wreck, kind of like Laurie in the recent Halloween sequels, I thought that worked for what that was trying to make fun of. Then there's also Regina Hall coming back as Brenda. I really like her sassy attitude that she brought with her role in the prior movies, especially with the iconic scene in the movie theater from the first Scary Movie film. Shawn Wayans also comes back as Ray, who is the love interest to Brenda from the first two films, and the running joke of his character is that he is gay, but he says he's not gay, but yeah, all that there together. It was nice to see him back, as well as his brother, Marlon Wayans, coming back as Brenda's brother, Shorty, who is still smoking marijuana as he has been doing in the previous films, and now he is a modern day streamer who gets paid obscene amounts of money just for being himself, like, just doing stupid stuff while streaming with others and whatever, making fun of that whole era of modern culture today. And yeah, the four of them back together, I think they really helped make this movie work as much as it was able to, as they are easily some of the best parts of the film. Some of the newer cast, we have the actress who plays the daughter to Cindy, and I think that she channeled Anna Faris in what she did in the previous films so well, of course, playing someone who is the daughter of that character. And then there's other characters that pop up in here, some legacy characters like Special Officer Doofy, and then the half-sister to Cindy's daughter, Tuesday, who is a clear parody of Wednesday, played by Jenna Ortega, also her character from the Scream franchise, yeah, all that together, and numerous other players do pop up here, whether you recognize them from the past or they're just new here for this film. Now getting into the writing of this movie. This film has Keenan Ivory Wayans come back as one of the writers, same thing with Shawn and Marlon Wayans, and what they are doing is essentially taking the archetype of the Scream film from 2022 or Scream 5 and using that as a framework for the plot of now Scary Movie 6, which makes sense in one angle because the first Scary Movie film basically tied together the first Scream movie from 1996 and I Know What You Did Last Summer, also from that same era, to basically do its whole through line while throwing in a bunch of parodies and stuff in there for the sake of the narrative and plot. On another angle, though, I think to me that was the biggest thing holding this movie down in terms of trying to do something fresh and new, because it's basically taking a tried and true formula, or at least taking, what another series that has recently rebooted has done, which has been effective and successful given that we've gotten a few Scream sequels in the last few years. But I think that taking another horror movie, especially a recent one, if this series was now trying to basically make up for lost time and parody a bunch of recent horror films and just try to do all that together, I think that would have been a better angle to do. I mean, there are other stuff that this movie parodies as well. Like I said, the movie is trying to cancel the cancel culture that has really ramped up in the amount of time that we have gotten since we have seen these characters back together. I mean, we had the Me Too movement pop up, the pandemic pop up, a bunch of stuff together. The movie even opens with a really recent nod or reference to my favorite movie of 2025 in a not so subtle way, but I thought that was actually a really good opening gag here. And then among other stuff that was recently just released or was in recent public consciousness, one of the ads that I saw in the lead up to the release of this movie showed that the recent Michael Jackson biopic was parodied, starring Kenan Thompson, among other stuff. I mean, that gag got a laugh out of me. The movie did get a lot of laughs out of me. I'm not going to deny that. But I will say that what is tied in with the narrative not being so creative with itself, I think the biggest thing that was holding this movie down too was that the laughs were hit and miss. And again, it's mostly due to how there is a specific choice of horror movies that are selected to be parodied here, and some of them either feel too far off, even though they're from recent memory, to really be effective, or they were just thrown in there for the sake of being thrown in there and just to make fun of a recent movie and not have any just semblance or connectivity to the plot. That's my problem with a lot of these parody movies, just for the sake of taking a recent movie and making fun of it just for the sake of making fun of it. Get Out, which you can see the Blu-ray here behind me, that movie is almost a decade old, and we've seen a lot of parodies of that movie since that movie's release up until now. But there were some gags that I did like from recent horror movies that were lampooned on here. The gag involving weapons, the horror movie from last year that was one of my favorites in 2025, I thought that was a neat little gag. There are two nods to Sinners from last year. The Substance from a couple of years ago was also made fun of. And then also just bringing back a bunch of the characters from either prior movies or just references to other characters from recent horror movies or other movies that are trying to have their own cake be spoiled by making fun of. There's a recent animated hit movie that is a specific sequence being used here, which I thought was pretty on the nose, but you know, again, this movie is trying to set out to do one thing, and it's taking a bunch of movies and making fun of them while tied into a really basic plot here. And the audience for this movie is going to know what they're getting in for. And for me, I knew what I was getting in for more or less. And the movie did surprise me in a couple of ways, but I still found it to be pretty middle of the road in terms of what it is as a spoof or parody movie. And it's not even one of the stronger ones that I have seen, at least even compared to the first two Scary Movie films. I think that this is a step down between the first two films, though I don't think it is a complete dumpster fire like a lot of critics have been saying. Although I should say that the movies have never been positively reviewed. They've always skewed negatively. And I don't feel 100% negative towards this movie, but I don't feel 100% positive either, because I have seen what has worked better in other parody movies of the past. And who knows, we may or may not get more of these movies or other parody movies in the future, but in any sense, I guess the movie is harmless if you want to take it for what it's worth and just what the film is doing and just reuniting this cast that a lot of people love and stuff. And yeah, so you know what you're getting in for. Watch at your own risk. You don't necessarily need my opinion on this movie to make up your own mind, as this movie, from what I saw before seeing it this morning in some early box office numbers, this has apparently opened number one here in the US with over $100 million worldwide, specifically on a $30 million budget. And yeah, this movie didn't look that expensive to make, just from the technical elements and stuff here, from how it's shot, trying to emulate the fifth Scream film, and everything else put in between. These movies are pretty economical to have themselves make money and profit. So yeah, I wasn't necessarily a fan of this movie, but I know others will be and are, just from seeing how everything is returning. So know what you're getting in for if you're going to go ahead and see this film. With all of that being said, my final verdict for Scary Movie is 2.5 out of 5 stars. Now, here is my review for the 2026 version of Masters of the Universe. Based on the media franchise of the same name by Mattel, the plot of this sword and sorcery film follows Adam, who returns to his home planet of Eternia from Earth to fulfill his destiny to become He-Man and to save his home planet from the evil forces of Skeletor. Going into this movie, I was curious to see this film as well too, despite me not having a lot of prior knowledge with He-Man or just the Masters of the Universe franchise in general. Now, with how I know about He-Man, of course, this is a very big franchise for those that have grown up in the 1980s, between the toys and the cartoon. There was also a prior live-action film adaptation of this franchise, so this is the second live-action film adaptation of He-Man, and you know, I didn't know anything about it prior, and I didn't know much about anything going into this one. I should say that I know little to nothing about He-Man before seeing this film. But what got me interested was the cast and the director at the helm here. This film is directed by Travis Knight. The only prior film of his that I have seen, I think, the only live-action film of his prior to this one that I have seen is Bumblebee from 2018, which is easily the best live-action Transformers film. And so he seemed like a fitting choice to go ahead and make a live-action He-Man movie, or Masters of the Universe as this is just called here. And again, the cast that had me interested in seeing it, and it seemed like it could have a lot to offer and maybe kickstarting a new franchise for a new generation of those to discover He-Man for. Starting out with the cast and their performances, we have Nicholas Galitzine as Adam, or as he would be known as, He-Man. Now, I first knew and saw of him in the comedy film Bottoms. If you haven't seen that film, that was one of my favorite movies of that year, so I highly recommend seeing that. I thought he was quite good there, and I liked him here as well too. Now, he plays basically like a stick in the mud for the first chunk of this movie where he is introduced after he is aged up from the initial opening of this movie, because he is obsessed with finding this sword that he was sent to Earth with after his homeworld was getting crushed by Skeletor when he was a child. And then he finally returns back to Eternia, and it's in shambles, and he's trying to fulfill his destiny to be He-Man. I think it works because this is an origin story. This is a very clear origin story to what we are seeing with the idea of He-Man and him fulfilling this hero's journey despite being inexperienced in it being a decade and a half since he was back at home. But I think Galitzine fit the bill for what he was trying to do in terms of being this unlikely hero who eventually warms up to being a hero as these stories go. The supporting cast includes the likes of Idris Elba, who plays Duncan. He is basically the mentor and trainer to Adam when he was a child, but coming back to Eternia from Earth, we see him basically as this washed up figure after the fall of Eternia from years ago. And, you know, Idris Elba is a class act. He is a badass here. And he has his moments of also like very down to earth nature and all that kind of stuff here. I mean, anytime I see Idris Elba in any movie just about, I just smile. I think he is awesome. We have his daughter, Tila, played by Camila Mendes, who is the childhood friend of Adam and is also another warrior too. And I thought she did well for this movie too, and bouncing off of Adam and a lot of other stuff here in her being the one helping guide him back to Eternia from Earth. And then the villains of the movie. We have Jared Leto as Skeletor. Now, I know he is an iconic villain of this series and just cartoons and other pop culture in general. Jared Leto is unrecognizable here, mostly because he is doing a motion capture performance and doing a different voice, but a lot of the times, I forgot this was even Jared Leto supposedly playing him, and I think this amounts to being one of the better performances I've seen from him recently, because he really knew how to level himself, be on the same playing field as what the rest of the movie was at least attempting to try to do, which I'll get into, but he had the right amount of over-the-top kind of nature, and also just being a menacing villain as a whole here. He really understood the assignment, in other words. And then you have his right-hand woman, Evelyn, played by Alison Brie, and I like Alison Brie, but I didn't think that she was on the same level as Leto here, because she was just hamming it up a lot more so. She didn't have as much screen time anyway, so there's a lot more for the other characters that I've mentioned here with this film. So mostly the performances I thought worked for how the movie was trying to present itself, in me not knowing this franchise, period. Getting into the writing of this movie, the writing of this film sees 4 writers credited from what I recall, and it's clear that this movie is an origin story, like I said. And it's basically going through the hero's journey of He-Man, or Adam, as he is for most of the movie, and having himself be proven as the true prince of Eternia, and like trying to reclaim his title and trying to like save his homeworld from Skeletor and everything like that. I think that played out to a pretty routine extent. It played out like another another hero story, if you would, excuse me. It played out as you would expect this kind of story to play out in a fantasy angle, and I think that is mostly what kept the movie going, on top of what was done creatively in its tone as well, in that this is basically a campy fantasy film. And there's a lot of merit to that. In many instances, it's very fun, and what I'll mention with the action sequences, but the movie also decisively tries to inject a lot of humor here, and I think it is over-reliant on that. Now, a lot of people would say that this is comparable to like a Marvel Cinematic Universe film or other recent kind of movie like that, to be full of levity and just keep it going with a lot of laughs, but it became intrusive to the point to where it was forced, and even slight subtle moments or little moments were just injected with humor. And it was obvious to me because the audience that I saw this with really ate it up, which I cannot fault them completely for. This movie is mainly geared towards families and those that grew up with He-Man from decades ago. So clearly this movie is going to hit with them as it did with my audience. The end of the movie saw them give the film a round of applause. So that is a clear indication. But I thought it mostly didn't work for me on that angle. And it just really got me to where I was like, okay, yeah, there were funny moments, but mostly it was just trying to really hammer that in home, even in some of the serious moments here and there. Then the movie, I feel, was overlong. I thought it was a bit too long at about 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I didn't realize it was that long until I looked up the running time afterward. The previous film I reviewed, Scary Movie, was only just over an hour and a half. The rest of those movies are about an hour and a half anyway, so that's why I didn't feel the running time there as much. But with this film, yeah, I thought at moments it slowed down in between some of the action sequences and other moments in between where we were getting character development. But with those moments of action and other visual spectacle, I think that is what worked a lot with the movie too. The direction by Travis Knight I thought was very strong, and the action sequences that involved hand-to-hand combat and a bunch of choreography there close up that didn't necessarily involve a lot of visual effects behind the characters, that really worked. I thought that was effective in seeing us have all the action and scale that the movie's trying to go for. The budget for this movie was apparently upwards of $200 million, so you can see a lot of that on the screen, though it does fall kind of like a recent MCU movie into the modern trappings of looking artificial or fake in moments, just with the backgrounds and it looking like the characters, I should say, were really not standing in front of an actual set, despite a lot of the physical sets for Eternia really being there in terms of running around corners and like the interiors and stuff like that. That stuff was well designed. I thought that was well done. But I think that the movie really was let down by the pace and just the humor that you see altogether. So with that, I'm a little torn as to what I think of this movie overall. I haven't exactly decided like what to really lay down or hammer this movie down with, because this movie has campy fantasy fun, but I think it is brought down by being over-reliant on humor and it being overlong here. Clearly, the audience I was with was entertained. Same thing with what I mentioned in my previous review for Scary Movie, in that the intended audience for this film is going to like it. The intended audience for these films are going to be into it if they choose to see these films in theaters or at all. And I think with me being someone that is an outsider to He-Man, not knowing that much about him or the rest of the series, I mean, it's something that gave me an okay introduction, I would say, but also as a film working together, it's not necessarily the most cohesive thing in the world. And I think that it could have been tightened up or cut down specifically in the editing to help the pace go along better and just have everything feel like it's a much more tight and compact package here. So I would say that, well, if I were to say which of these movies is the one to recommend of the weekend, I would say that I would give Masters of the Universe the slight edge over Scary Movie. And it's more or less for a family audience and meant for those anyway. So, like, of course, yeah, you're going to see Masters of the Universe over Scary Movie if you're choosing to see something appropriate for all ages, more or less. I mean, this movie is a little bit on the edgier side for being a PG-13 film because the dialogue and some of the humor is like more risque or a lot more suggestive. Quite a bit of language is in here with profanity, but I mean, I don't know. It'd be kind of cool for kids that saw this movie to be like, oh, I'm seeing something that's a little bit more on the edgy side that I shouldn't necessarily be seeing or whatever. But in any sense, I thought that Masters of the Universe was okay. I guess I am more on the slightly positive end of this movie, leaning towards that, even with the major issues that I've mentioned with it. There are 2 mid-credit scenes and a post-credit scene with Masters of the Universe. And I forgot to mention this with my Scary Movie review. There are 2 mid-credit scenes that parody other recent horror movies if you want to stick around for those. But for He-Man or Masters of the Universe, yeah, this is clear setup for what's going to happen in the future of the series, if it's going to happen. I mean, I don't know how this movie's going to recoup its budget after it apparently didn't do well this opening weekend. But I thought it was okay. I thought it was a decent time, especially if you know what you're looking for. If you're a fan of this franchise, I assume you're going to have a fun time with this movie anyway because of what it's doing and just being a reintroduction for newer generations or just something for nostalgic purposes for those that were already into the brand in the first place. And that's, I guess, the core theme of both of these movies that I've just reviewed here. For their intended audiences, nostalgic or not, or just wanting to see what they want to see, they're going to work for them, even if I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of either one of these films. But for Masters of the Universe specifically, I would cautiously recommend it. And my final verdict for Masters of the Universe is 3 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Scary Movie and Masters of the Universe. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.